Buenos días a todos y todas. Vamos a arrancar con nuestro evento ya formalmente inaugurado y creo que efectivamente, como la presidenta anticipó, van a ser 2 días de jornadas académicas en las que vamos a confrontarnos con una temática particular, una temática muy retadora, que nos lleva a reflexionar sobre los cambios en la modalidad y formato en que se hacen los negocios y sobre cómo, en nuestro rol de profesionales de la propiedad intelectual, debemos de enfocar nuestro trabajo, nuestros servicios y, por supuesto, entender cuáles son esas áreas en las que debemos continuar con formación, actualización y la incorporación de equipos multidisciplinarios para atender lo que hoy precisamente el mercado y las empresas nos presentan como un reto. Vamos a iniciar con el panel titulado Battle Royale and Esports. 2 elementos que son especialmente relevantes en una de las industrias de mayor crecimiento, que es el tema precisamente de los videojuegos. Batalla Royale, que es un género de videojuegos que combina elementos de supervivencia entre varios jugadores hasta llegar al hombre que queda de pie, y que vino a revolucionar la forma en que estos se llevan a cabo. Y lo mismo el tema eSports, donde hemos visto que ya no solamente es jugarlo, sino incluso presenciarlo. De 335 millones de personas que se dedicaban a ver gamers, no necesariamente a jugar, se espera que vamos a llegar a un número de arriba de 500 millones en apenas 2 años. Es decir, una audiencia tan grande o más que muchos deportes en vivo. Para esto vamos a tener la participación de David Greenspan y Gregory Boyd, quienes van a ser presentados por nuestro moderador. Y nuestro moderador es José Roberto Herrera, abogado por la Pontificia Universidad Javeriana de Bogotá en Colombia, magíster en propiedad intelectual del Instituto de Múnich para la propiedad intelectual a través de las universidades de George Washington y el Instituto Max Planck de Múnich, y de las universidades de Augsburgo y Tecnología de Múnich, Alemania. Es profesor en la Cátedra de Propiedad Intelectual en la Universidad Javeriana y cuenta con experiencia docente en el Instituto Max Planck de Múnich. Es árbitro en conflictos relacionados con la propiedad intelectual, adscrito a los Centros de Conciliación de la Cámara de Comercio de Bogotá y la Dirección Nacional de Derecho de Autor. Presidente del Comité de Derecho de Autor de ACIPI, y miembro de la Junta Directiva del Centro Colombiano de Derecho de Autor y del Comité de Marcas No Tradicionales de la INTA. Desde el año 2011, José Roberto dirige la firma Herrera Díaz Abogados, que tiene como especialidad la atención a los temas de propiedad intelectual y derecho del entretenimiento. Con esto les dejo entonces con un panel que nos va a presentar sobre ese segmento de la tecnología de mayor crecimiento actualmente. Gracias.
Muy buenos días a todos. Muchas gracias, Marco, por tu presentación. Para mí es todo un honor compartir el panel con semejantes expertos en videojuegos. Creo que acá estamos con los que están dentro de los top 5. David sabe muchísimo de toda la casuística, ha trabajado en muchos sectores relacionados con la industria, y Greg, sobre todo, tiene muy claro el tema de la publicidad en los videojuegos y la publicidad en general, el tema regulatorio. Quisiera, primero que todo, explicar un poco la relevancia de por qué este tema de los videojuegos en el tema de la tecnología que estamos tratando. Siendo un congreso de Derecho y Tecnología, este avance de los videojuegos cada vez presenta más casos, casuística, temas legales que están estrechamente relacionados con los avances tecnológicos. Y el primero de ellos precisamente son los eSports, del que nos va a hablar Greg, y en estos deportes electrónicos esa relevancia del derecho para participar ahí es muy interesante. Antes los abogados pues, que se dedicaban al entretenimiento pues, regulaban el tema ya de la organización de eventos de carne y hueso, de los deportistas de carne y hueso. Acá ya existe una relación muy nueva, un tema muy nuevo, que es el tema de los deportistas electrónicos, en donde Greg nos va a explicar cómo cómo iniciar un torneo de deportes electrónicos, todo el aspecto de publicidad, todo el aspecto de propiedad intelectual, nos va a tener muy claro Greg. Obviamente nos vamos a enfocar en temas de propiedad intelectual, pero también nos va a explicar algunos casos relacionados ya con publicidad que no son tan relacionados con propiedad intelectual, pero igualmente nos va a tocar ese tema. Por otro lado, David nos va a hablar sobre dos casos muy interesantes en videojuegos. El primero es aquel relacionado con el tema de las reclamaciones respecto a los bailes. No sé, me imagino que ustedes han visto esa noticia que está muy de moda respecto a demandas que se han hecho contra Epic Games por parte de actores o simples ciudadanos que hicieron un baile en YouTube y demandaron a la compañía reclamando o un derecho de autor o un derecho de imagen, el llamado para nosotros derecho de imagen o en Estados Unidos el publicity right. Nos va a explicar ese caso. Y por otro lado, nos va a explicar el caso de los tatuajes. De los tatuajes ya no una foto que toma alguien a Messi en un partido, sino la divulgación que hace Messi con el tatuaje ya en el videojuego, ¿sí? Para ver si existe un derecho de autor ahí, existe también un derecho de imagen, que también son unas discusiones muy, muy interesantes que nos va a explicar David y toda la casuística alrededor. Eso es básicamente la introducción de los temas. Y me permito entonces presentar, David nos va a introducir un poco sobre la importancia y la relevancia de esta industria que ya produce ingresos mayores a la industria del cine. Entonces eso es lo primero que nos va a presentar David. Posteriormente Greg nos va a hablar sobre toda la estructura de cómo armar un torneo de deportes electrónicos, todo ese tema legal, y después volverá David con el tema casuístico. Pero entonces me permito resaltar las siguientes cualidades de cada uno. Gregory, por un lado, es director de entretenimiento interactivo de la firma Frankfurt Koenig, localizada en Nueva York, y donde ha asesorado a compañías relacionadas con la industria de videojuegos por más de 15 años. Su firma representa más de 100 compañías relacionadas con la industria de videojuegos alrededor del mundo y en donde ha ayudado a llevar a cabo la organización de diferentes torneos de deportes electrónicos. Igualmente ha publicado 2 textos relacionados con la industria de videojuegos. Su más reciente, titulado Video Game Law, Everything You Need to Know About Legal and Business Issues in the Game Industry, ha vendido miles de copias y ha sido utilizado por compañías de la industria y universidades en todo el mundo. Por otro lado, David ha estado involucrado desde el asesoramiento legal a la industria de los videojuegos por más de 20 años. Ha trabajado para Sony, THQ, Bandai Namco, Midway Games y ha trabajado en el asesoramiento de más de 100 videojuegos respecto a su desarrollo, publicidad, licenciamiento, distribución, mercadeo y negociación de acuerdos. David fue el autor principal de la publicación de la OMPI llamada Mastering the Game, Business and Legal Issues for Video Game Developers, en la que Greg también es autor. Y quería comentarles también que hace poco salió la traducción al español, si están interesados, está en línea, es muy buena obra, creo que es la obra más completa en videojuegos, y la tradujo Juan Darío Beltani de Argentina. Igualmente David dicta clases de transacciones relacionadas con entretenimiento y enfocadas en la industria de videojuegos para las universidades de leyes de Santa Clara y Miami. David también ha estado en Colombia y en varios países de América Latina, y me prometió que desde esta conferencia va a empezar a practicar su español. Bueno, no siendo más, entonces le doy la palabra a David para que nos comente sobre el tema de las cifras rápidamente y después empezará Greg su intervención. Muchas gracias.
Hola. That's the extent of what I've learned so far. First of all, it's a real honor to be able to speak in front of you, and Greg and I both thank you for this very gracious invitation. Been thrilled to meet so many nice people just within the last 24 hours. So hopefully we can entertain you with some dance moves and some tattoos, as well as some esports. But I wanted to first provide you with some numbers just to illustrate the incredible size of the video game industry, because most people are rather surprised by it. And according to a market researcher, Superdata, worldwide revenue for 2017 was about $108 billion. Newzoo, which is another researcher, claimed that revenue for 2018 would reach about $137 billion, and in 5 years, the market will be about $200 billion. And that's incredible numbers in a relatively short period of time. And to give you an illustration on how impressive these numbers are, the best way is to compare it to other forms of entertainment, which was previously mentioned. The global box office for films is $42 billion in 2018, although a lot of people believe because of ancillary markets that that number has exceeded the video game market, so that's somewhat up in the air. Book publishing, the global market's about $143 billion. The music industry in 2017 was about $17.3 billion. FIFA, which has a massive presence throughout the world, their revenues in 2018 was about $6.1 billion, but that was helped considerably by television rights for the World Cup. And Electronic Arts, which is a major video game distributor, developer, paid over $160 million in royalties to FIFA in 2017. The National Football League, which is the biggest sport in the United States, their revenue in 2017 was about $14 billion. The NBA, the numbers are a little dated, but what I was able to gather was in 2015 to 2016, $6.5 billion. But just to show you how big the video game space is, recently the NBA signed a licensing deal with Take-Two, and the amount of money that they agreed to was about $1.5 billion for an exclusive license over a number of years. And then the last number I have is that there are about 400 universities in the United States supposedly teaching courses that are related to video games. That could be development issues, technology, software, animation, so forth and so on. And then finally, territories. China has become the biggest market in the world, and that's one of the reasons why the numbers have grown so substantially. It hit about $38 billion in revenue, mostly driven by mobile technology. The U.S. is second at about $30 billion. Japan is about $19 billion. And then there's Europe, Middle East, and Africa combined at about $29 billion. And then finally, Latin America comes in at about $5 billion. But it's a market that is growing. And on that note, I'll hand it off to Greg. And one other area that, in fact, video games is growing substantially is esports, which Greg will talk about.
Hello. My name is Greg Boyd. I'm a partner at Frankfurt Kernet, and I run the interactive entertainment department there with my partner, Sean Kane. Thank you very much for having me and having David here. We really appreciate it. I'm going to go through a few of my slides, and then we're going to hand it back over to David. And as they mentioned, I am going to talk about esports tournaments, and then after that, I'm going to talk a little bit about advertising regulatory in the United States. These have buried in them and all around them a lot of intellectual property components, but intellectual property is just one particular part of them. So as you know, in fact, as David just said, we're talking $90 billion for the video game industry, and esports is generating about $1 billion of that. The esports prize pool is up over $100 million worldwide, and that's up from $3 million in 2010. So think about what that growth looks like. We used to give away $3 million 9 years ago to people playing games against each other, and now we give away more than $100 million to people playing games against each other. And there are companies that are talking about doing individual tournaments now for 10 or 20 or $30 million or more. Here is a bet that I think you should all make with your friends, and you will win. Tell them by the 2021, the largest amount of money in a sporting event in the United States will be based on a video game. And they will laugh at you, and they will say, no way, and then they will later buy you a beer because you will win, or whatever it is that you would like, I personally think by 2021, in 2 years, there will be a $40 or $50 million single tournament. And I have very good intuitions on this because we do a lot of these tournaments. I can really see it coming. So here's an example of one multi-day tournament. 173,000 people attended the Extreme Masters in 2017. 55 million people watched online. More people watch Twitch, which is a video game streaming service, than watch ESPN. And this sounds strange to us, and I mean me too, because we're old. And so we don't understand, rock and roll, right? We don't get how important it is, but a lot of young people spend a lot of time and they spend a lot of their money with esports, and it's just getting bigger and bigger. I recently found a friend whose father is in his 60s, and he spends a lot of time watching video games online now that he knows the rules. And to put your mind behind it, and we're going to get to the law in a second, but I find it helps psychologically to understand, why would anyone do this, right? Why would you do this? I think, we can all play, football, real football, not American football. We can all play football, but the truth is we're not very good. If we were very good, we would not be here. So we like to watch people that are very good, right? It's a lot of fun. And the same thing is true with esports. A lot of younger people understand these games very well. Of course they play them. They spend a lot of time playing them. But just like we like to watch football, or if you're following the March Madness NCAA tournament, and I know it was on in the hotel yesterday, we like to watch people that are better at basketball than us. It's the same thing. We just don't quite get these sports because these sports are new to us. So what are we going to talk about? And if and when one of your clients calls you and they want to be involved in an esports tournament, or they want to set up an esports tournament, you don't have to represent a video game publisher. Every person in here represents brands. You're all intellectual property attorneys in South America or Central America or elsewhere. And if one of your brand clients wants to get a sponsorship in an esports tournament, it will help you to be, especially smart on how to get that done. So we're going to talk a little bit about tournament structure. We're going to talk a bit about hiring players on a team. That's also interesting because brands sponsor teams, just like in other sports. So one of your brands could come to a team. And you're welcome to take photos of my slides if you like. You're welcome to my slides. I will send them to you. And also, all of your English is amazing. My Spanish is terrible. I'm sorry. I had 2 years of it in high school, and I really regret not being a better student right now. So it helps to say that. Okay, I'm going to be a better person. But I'm saying that I'll send these to you guys, and as I understand it, I have a summary of my slides in English and that you can all have as well. And it's got the core information that's on the slide and off the slide. And the last thing we're going to talk about is advertising regulatory requirements. So when you have advertising related to esports or advertising related to video games in general, what are the requirements? And this is going to be a little bit of a preview for later today. I understand there's going to be a nice panel on influencers. So we'll set that up, maybe a little appetizer course, at least as it relates to U.S. law and influencers. So when you do an esports tournament, and I put the NHL down there because we worked on the recent NHL tournament, is it going to be an online tournament? Are you going to play in person, or are you going to do both? A normal esports tournament, a large one, will start online. People will play in their individual countries or regions together, and then you will take the best people from each region, and they will play against each other, and then you will fly them somewhere. Like perhaps we'll go to Lima for South America, and we'll go to Hamburg for Europe, and then the best of the best will meet in a central location, perhaps the United Kingdom, perhaps somewhere in the United States. It's usually in the United States currently for a final. And so it has two very different structures. Your online structure is going to be completely different than your in-person structure. Can you imagine? We need to vet the age of the people. We need to see if they're under 18, or maybe even if they're 18, do you want the parent to come with the young person? How does that affect your client's costs? We don't want to have children perhaps under a certain age play no matter what, because even if they're very good, it might seem too risky, or it might be against your local regulations to have children that young win tournaments or win a travel prize. Also, we have to think about rules and localization. In some countries, you can give away money very freely. In other countries, you can't give away money or travel. And then we need to think about legal or production blended issues. How do we handle cheaters? How do you know when somebody's cheating? What's going to be your arbitration process to sort cheating? Cheating is a lot easier to sort out in an in-person tournament than an online tournament, but the best players might not get to your in-person tournament if you haven't properly run your online tournament. Also, and you're very familiar with this, being international attorneys, you have to localize the rules into the local language, and you have to consider which countries you're going to review legally or not. Are you going to do, are you going to do Mexico and Peru and every individual South American country? For instance, if you want to run a tournament in South America, or will you just do 2 or 3 core South American countries, and perhaps you will hit Mexico, Peru, and Brazil. You'll translate into Spanish and Portuguese, and then you know that you haven't done the best job, but no one has all the time and all the money to do the best job. We just need to do a very good job, right? And you'll often go with something like that. So you have to make all of these interesting different decisions as you go through setting up the tournament structure. And I'm happy to answer questions on this at the end. And we can talk about, for instance, what countries do you normally go to in South America or Central America? What countries do you normally screen for in the EU? Happy to chat about any of that. So another thing to think about is that you're going to have the end user license agreement for the game, and you're going to have the tournament rules themselves. That factors into what we talked about before. You're going to have the privacy policies, and the privacy policies are monsters now because in the US you can collect a lot of information, but in South America, which tends to follow an EU model, it's a little more restrictive. And then in the EU, in those 28 member states, it's also restrictive. Particularly some countries in the EU. Germany, it's enormously difficult to get rights of privacy or personal data from players. And sometimes you need things like, we need to know your name so that we can buy you airline tickets, right? And then that seems like a really obvious thing to get at, but it turns out in some countries like Germany, that's a bit of a process. Or we need to photograph you, player, because we're going to televise the tournament. In the US, you can do a lot of things as a straight click through. You click, you get all the rights you need, and then there's a lot of trust there. But in many countries in the world, you really have to go on an individualized basis and say, can you please do this? Can you please do that? Another element about that in a privacy sense is they being the player are not required to do it. So I have not had this happen yet, but I wonder, will I come to a day where a player says, no, you can't film me, or no, you can't publish my name, but yet the player wins. So I don't think there's a high chance of that happening, but there are some countries in the world that we'd have to allow that to happen. And again, the things that we talked about before, the travel consideration and the children's participation. And also think about what that means practically. This is not the law, but it's practical. I would rather have a 17-year-old go to New York City with their mom than a 19-year-old go to New York City without anyone, right? And think about what that means. And think about that when you make your tournament rules. This is not an abstraction. Perhaps you say up to, and you pick your age, have to be accompanied by a parent or guardian. And also, to what extent do you police them when they're in the city? That's another thing to think about. I'm just checking the time and making sure I don't go over. All right. So what kind of prizes are you going to give for esports? The safest kind of prize to give for esports is virtual currency. Anyone that's involved in your esports tournament really cares about your game. So they are very happy to have a virtual currency or in-game items as a prize. That is the safest thing to give in any country in the world. When you get to real money is usually going to be given away at the end stages of a tournament. You want to avoid gambling and regulatory issues. So in the US, you have to have chance, so some elements of randomness, or perhaps a majority of randomness. Consideration is anything of value, meaning they pay in some consideration to join the tournament, and a prize. There's going to be something at the end, perhaps money. Now, One of the ways that you avoid gambling regulatory in many places in the world, including in the U.S., is you make sure there is no entry fee for your tournament. So if you are running or sponsoring a tournament that has an entry fee, make sure that you question them deeply on the gambling regulatory. Another way that you further distance yourself from gambling regulatory is you only give prizes in the game, like in-game currency. That's something to consider. And just be really thoughtful about where each place is going to be, because you have to develop a consensus and you have to develop something that's going to work in each country. And I'm happy to talk about the countries that are most difficult to run esports. Germany is it's difficult for privacy regulatory. Italy is difficult for giving out real money. We can talk about any specifics that you like. And obviously, I don't know every country in the world, but I know the places I've had problems with in the past. And this is also an interesting thing for all of you as international attorneys. You can become the expert on your country, right? And if people will, when they want to run events in your country, in South America, Central America, wherever you are, you can say, I know all of the esports regulatory in Mexico or in Panama, and that will make you enormously valuable. So the last thing to think about on this slide is taxation. How are prizes taxed in different countries, and how are prizes going to be taxed with players if they receive money in your country? It's expensive, it's complicated, but when places are giving away $2 million, $3 million, $10 million in prizing, and they certainly have thousands of dollars to pay you to sort out the taxation and regulatory issues. So that's another great place for all of us to get involved. Okay. This goes back to what I was saying a couple of slides ago. It's just really a drilling down on it. You know, how do I pick those countries, or how do we pick those countries that we do the review in? We look at the player numbers. If you're going to have 100,000 people play in Peru and you're only going to have 1,000 people play in Panama, as much as you might like your Panama friends, it's probably not going to review in Panama. We're probably just going to review in Peru. Language coverage. The common international esports language translations are what we refer to as the EFIGS countries, so English, French, Italian, German, and Spanish. Most esports will be translated into just those. If you have a strong Brazilian presence, we might also go to Portuguese as well. But at that point, it's just really, you know, where do you have most of your players? Obviously, Asia, if you're going to have huge Chinese presence, and there often are, like StarCraft, for instance, that's one of the games, they'll have a large Chinese presence, they'll have a large Korean presence, Japanese presence. You'll expand that, and you'll translate into those Asian languages as well. For those of you that are involved on a regulatory level, I'm not encouraging this, but I mentioned to you that one of the things that sort of pushes people toward localizing to your country is the amount of enforcement that you have in your country. So if you know the enforcement background in your country really well, you can express that to sponsors and people that put on e-tournaments and say, you know, you really should think about reviewing in our country because every now and then there is a fine related. They don't like that. All right. This is one of the most difficult parts, and we don't do immigration, but we hire immigration. What do you do if you have a Syrian or an Iranian person on an online tournament that wins, and then they have a chance to go to your country for the final? Can people from Syria come to your country under any circumstances? I don't know, you know, and that's a complicated question. And we do two things on that. The first thing is we try to space as much as possible so that winners have time to fulfill visa requirements, and we have people at the esports level cooperate with visas. The other thing we try to do, if there are going to be some very problematic countries, Iran is a very problematic country, Syria is a very problematic country, sometimes in the beginning, and I have mixed feelings about this, we just exclude those people from the start because we don't want to deal with a visa issue for a very difficult country at the end if those folks happen to win. Now, that's not my dream, that's not the way I want to do it, but sometimes that's the way we do it now. But to the extent you're going to do a final in a place that those folks can travel easily, you're going to be more open there. So you have to think about where all the live events are, and you have to think about where all the players are coming from in advance, and you have to coordinate it. Yeah, don't know what else to say about that, except it's a mess. If you do immigration, this is a wide open place for you to have a nice practice. So handling cheating, I mentioned cheating. One of the ways we do it online is to have both players record. Another thing we do is we install additional software protections for online games that will detect cheating. And the last thing, and often the most important part in any game, is community policing. The community hates cheaters, and they tend to know who has a reputation for cheating, and they will report on them. But it's still going to be up to you to sort that out. Now, when people go to a tournament and play, they're going to be playing on very regulated equipment in person, so it's less of an issue there. In those cases, the cheating is more like traditional sports cheating. And when I say traditional sports cheating, I agree to take some money, and in exchange for that money, I will not play so well today. Much harder to detect. But imagine, there's $1 million on the line, there's $5 million on the line, and the people playing are 19 years old, they're 25 years old. They're not always making the best decisions. One of the other things, just to get your head around esports and the amount of money involved in esports and also the complexity, so much of this is based on how quickly your neurons, like the actual elements between your brain and your hand, can fire. People think that, pick your favorite sport, 30 is old, 35 is old, right? Esports, 23 is old because your nerves are dying and we can't be gunslingers anymore, There are very, very few professional esports players in their late 20s because we have biological barriers to that. Okay. Intellectual property in these deals. We have to have the right of publicity for the player if we can get it. We need to think about copyright. You usually cannot have an esports tournament unless for that esports tournament you have permission of the publisher of the game to cooperate with you and allow you to do a tournament for their game and often to stream that game. So you should consider some payment to the publisher and trademark for the same reason. When you're hiring these players, think about how they will be paid if you ever hire the players. And the players are often hired into teams. Because they are so young, housing is usually included, a salary is usually included. They usually receive a percentage of their winnings. They often have a person that lives with them in the house that's a grown-up, and that grown-up makes sure that they do what they're supposed to do. And what they're supposed to do is enormously difficult. I smiled and laughed a lot too until I saw, they have to get up by like 9, which is a big deal if you're 18 years old. And they work out. When I work out, like they run, they lift weights, usually a couple of hours a day. They will play their game 6 or 8 hours a day. Their meals are often prepared for them in the house so that their nutrition is good. Because if you give an 18 or a 19-year-old millions of dollars, they're not going to eat well, right? Not without a little supervision. So all of those things are there, and they all have to be thought about, and they're in the contract. We're not just talking about them for fun. They are fun. It's a nice dinner party conversation. But if you're ever involved in the sponsorship and you're ever involved in these contracts, you need to look at things like this and ask questions about things like this. Okay. What do you expect of the players? Again, in the contract. They'll play tournaments, okay. How many tournaments do you want them to play? Maybe they love to go to Bolivia. Maybe they love to go to Rio. They will say, I will play this number of tournaments. I have to go to the Rio tournament. It will be a demand for them. How much time do they spend streaming, broadcasting online their games? That's the way these people become famous. Millions of people watch them for millions of hours, and that's how they get to know them. What are their practice times individually and with the team? To what extent do they have to physically exercise? What kind of exercises do they have to do, and for how long? If you really look at professional esports players, most of them, they are shockingly fit. So you should do some Googling after this for professional esports players. And then what events do they have to do? And just as a side thought, this is the part of their agreements that they hate the most. It sounds really nice to go to a place and sign autographs for an hour. I think everyone in the room would like to do that, right? But what if you had to go to a place and sign autographs for an hour every week? After the 20th or 21st time, I'd probably be a little tired of it, right? Maybe the second or third time, but certainly there's a number that you'd be tired of. Also, what happens to these folks when they have to change teams? So, are they allowed to play different games for other teams? Are they allowed to play the same game for other teams? How does their agreement terminate? And what constitutes breach? How do you determine if they're playing well or not playing well? All thoughts for you guys going through this. So, and then how do the employment laws in your country allow for esports players? Are they employees? Are they contractors? What insurance do you need? Is there a minimum wage that you need to put on their salary? And again, how are they taxed? All of these vary in all the different countries. And this is just one image I saw of these, these dudes working out. I'm pretty sure I couldn't curl that. That's got to be at least 40 pounds that guy has in his hands right there. Yeah. So again, if you're sponsoring a team, your brand is sponsoring a team, you will ask, where is this team based? Do they have salary? Do they have housing? Do they meet the minimum wage requirements? What insurance do you have on them? Because all of your brands don't want to be embarrassed if there's a problem, right? And hopefully all of these questions will help you be even smarter when you're kind of interrogating your brands and doing the sponsorships, or your brands are interrogating the esports teams for the sponsorships. Okay. All right. So we have a few more minutes. I was going to go to 27. Yeah, okay. So got 3 more minutes. I'm going to just cruise through advertising regulatory. I'm deliberately going fast here because I saw that there was a nice influencer panel later. So now switch. Let's imagine you're talking about the game or you're talking about hardware. Everything you say has to be true. Graphical quality, what it does as well. In the United States, if you lie about what your product does, you can actually be sued in a private right of action by plaintiffs' attorneys that work on a contingency fee basis. And it can result in millions of dollars of damages. So you have to worry about the private right of action for certain things, and you also have to worry about regulatory requirements. Our main federal regulator is the Federal Trade Commission. We also have it at the state level. You have the same thing in Central and South America. I'm going to cruise right over this really quickly. This is one slide on influencers. Here are the rules to remember on influencers for the states. It has to have an honest opinion. By the way, every esports athlete is an influencer. And everyone that plays your game and talks about your game in exchange for something of value is an influencer. What's their honest opinion? They have to disclose their relationship. The disclosure must fit the medium, which means if they're on Twitter, they have to disclose in something short that'll fit on Twitter. Instagram, you have a little more space. If they're disclosing in video, they can do more because they have video. The element of that to think about is, does the disclosure travel with the medium? So you want to make sure that wherever you put the disclosure, it's not one click away, it's with the medium and it's going to travel with the medium. So think about streaming, think about social media. When someone's streaming a long time, they'll often have a badge that'll be in the corner of the screen, or they'll often have a robot auto post every 5 minutes, every 10 minutes that says, sponsored by such and such a brand. All right, again, we can talk about this some more, but you're going to have a great panel on influencers later, and that's probably even better to ask about. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much. I'm going to turn this over to my friend David, who's going to talk about intellectual property.
Perdón. Como empezamos un poco tarde, les iba a pedir que vamos a quitar el espacio de preguntas al final, pero creo que tenemos el tiempo suficiente para, pues durante el Congreso, cualquier pregunta con ellos, pues para que pueda terminar David su presentación.
The esports challenge will be, can I finish my presentation in time? So Marcos actually introduced the concept of Battle Royale And my topic is a battle royale between the artist and the game developers. And tattoos and dance moves is a great illustration on how advancements in technology have resulted in new intellectual property issues that need to be addressed not only in the video game industry, but will probably have broader implications in other forms of entertainment. So to give you a quick summary, that's Bart Simpson. The first episode dealt with tattoos. Just a quick overview of the topics that I'll talk about regarding tattoos and dance moves. So tattoos involved game developers have recently been accused of infringing the copyrights involving tattoos appearing on athletes, tattoos digitally recreated on player avatars. And why is this important? Because there have been some cases involving tattoos in video games, and in fact even a movie, but no decisions were actually rendered by the court. They settled out of court. However, these most recent cases may change the landscape. Dance moves, game developers have been accused of using dance moves in violations of a dancer's copyrights and rights of publicity. However, just within the last 2 or 3 months, there's been some decisions which may render this issue moot temporarily, where the Supreme Court decided certain issues regarding copyright filings their opinion has resulted in the fact that some of these plaintiffs have removed the cases, but will probably refile. And so we'll go into a lot more detail about that shortly. So, what are some of the recent cases that have popped up? One involves the WWE wrestling video game where a wrestler had an artist's tattoo appearing on him, and the artist sued the game developer as a result of that. Another one involves a basketball game. This is LeBron James. This is how he looks in real life on the left with the Los Angeles Lakers, and that's a picture of him playing for the Cleveland Cavaliers, which is a basketball team in the National Basketball Association. So an artist, again, sued for copyright infringement when his tattoos appeared in various 2K basketball games. So not only did the developer sue 2K in that particular situation, but there was also another case involving basketball game again. And this is kind of an interesting case because the artists are not actually suing the game developer, but this company called Solid Oak obtained the rights of the artist to control the licensing, and as a result, they've decided to file a lawsuit again against 2K. And the money's not a small amount that they're seeking. They originally sought a settlement of $800,000 for the improper use of what they claim were the tattoos on the basketball players. They offered a perpetual licensing fee for an additional $1.1 million. And some of the issues that have popped up in this particular lawsuit is actually the prominence of the tattoos. So 2K is arguing that, well, the tattoos really don't appear that prominently. The players play the game and it's hard to see the tattoos. Very similar to perhaps if you're watching a basketball game on television, it's kind of a challenge to see the tattoos when the players are actually moving. However, when the players are still, for example, maybe the player is at the foul line, the camera tends to focus a little more on the persona of the player, and perhaps you can see the tattoo more clearly. There are also game elements where you can play a replay, or you can slow down the camera, therefore seeing the tattoo on the particular player. So there's this argument, to what extent is the prominence of that tattoo on the player? And one judge acknowledged that it's kind of a unique situation because the prominence is going to be controlled by the actual player and may vary. And then I also have some information on how Solid Oak determined the amount of damages based on their calculations. They claimed they were owed $572,000. Again, an incredible amount of money, at least in my opinion. And they based this on a previous case involving a UFC fighter, a tattoo artist in a company called THQ, which is not in business anymore, although certain rights were purchased by another company. And the bankruptcy court awarded $22,500. However, the amount was appealed and they settled out of court, and it was assumed that they probably settled for a lot more money. And the fact that there were more than one tattoo, perhaps Solid Oak thought that the value was a lot greater. So, a lot of money, and those are some of the cases that are currently pending. So these are the textbook cases that have appeared in the past regarding tattoos. And in this particular situation, EA, which is one of the biggest publishers in the world, had used this player, Ricky Williams, on the cover of their video game. And if you look really closely on the player's arm, you can see a tattoo. And that resulted in a lawsuit where the artist said, I didn't give you the rights to display it on the box, so therefore I wanted some damages for that. And one of the things that's happened is that because video games now make so much money, people realize that this is a very big business. Combined with a very successful game, lawsuits are going to start to happen. If this was a game that didn't sell a lot of copies, perhaps, wasn't involving EA, maybe there wouldn't have been a lawsuit involving this particular situation. Now, you may have seen this. Even though it involves the film industry, it's still very relevant for the video game industry, and this was a tattoo that was drawn on Mike Tyson, and the actor on the left had a tattoo that looked very similar to the one that was drawn on Mike Tyson. And this appeared in the film Hangover Part 2. As a result, the artist sues. Here's a brief clip from the trailer. Let's see if it, didn't work there. Let's see if I can go back. Screwed it up. Sorry about that. Oh, you see my entire presentation. Is there a way to go back on this? Sorry about that. What's that? I am pressing every button. This is why I would not compete in esports. Oh, it's the same button that appears on my computer that says go back. Okay, sorry about that. So let's see if I can show you this clip. And one of the arguments that the artist was making, that it was very prominently displayed in marketing materials as well as the film, but this is why we can't have Q&A, because I can't figure out how to do this. Okay, there it goes. There's no sound for this, because the thinking was that I would actually speak over it. So that's one of the main actors. And he's a bit shocked that this tattoo appears on his face. Understandable. Okay, so that's a quick scene. So here's another case. This was the one about THQ. The artist sues THQ in bankruptcy court, sought $4.16 million, or 2% of revenue based on sales. And the numbers come about because the game retailed at $59.99. Game sold approximately 660,000 copies. What's interesting is that this plaintiff was kind enough to base it on gross revenue, which is rarely done. Usually you have a bunch of deductions when you pay a licensor, any royalties. So again, the number was substantial that he was requesting. The judge awarded $22,500, which was the payment that they actually made to the athlete for the right to use his likeness in the game. And then this is another case involving a basketball player. This one's very interesting because it actually resulted in a TV commercial by Nike that was based on the athlete's tattoo. It appeared as a theme to a Nike television commercial. Now, the artist didn't receive a lot of money as compensation for the artwork, because typically an artist is thrilled by the fact that he's going to draw something on a well-known athlete, and therefore he's going to get a lot of publicity based on the artwork that he's done. So typically what happens in these situations, the athlete's not even thinking about signing a contract. The only thing that they will pretty much sign is a release where the artist says, if something happens to you physically, I'm released from any responsibility. But they're not talking about rights issues. So no paperwork is signed, no work for hire contract is signed, so forth and so on. So here's a look at the spot. Oops, did it again. there may be sound for this.
The Bulldog represents Simon Gratz, my high school. That's where the love for the game started. The sun god, Ra, is shining down on my family. Fatima, my wife, my queen. That's my youngest son, Nazir, my middle son, Ishmael, and my oldest son, Malik. That's me. I'm still gonna get something in the cartouche. Maybe Semper Fi. For always faithful.
So, based on that, what are some of the issues that you're dealing with tattoos? Some of the questions that would pop up are tattoos, in fact, copyrightable? And we'll talk about these in a few slides later. Are tattoos skinned on people copyrightable? Because is that considered a fixed medium? If so, who owns the copyright? And that's at the heart of all these issues. What rights does the artist have? What rights does the person who the tattoo is drawn on have, i.e. an athlete? And what right, well, that would be the customer, I guess. Can the artist control the exploitation of that tattoo that appears on that person's body? So you have to try to balance the interest between the copyright owner and rights of publicity, and this is an issue that has never really been addressed. Tattoos typically owned by the artist and not the person with the tattoos. So the artist obviously owns the tattoo when he draws it out on a sheet of paper, and you go into a tattoo store and you decide what tattoo you may want to actually put on your body. And then the second question is, well, once you take that tattoo and put it on someone's body, does the artist actually still own it? It appears that tattoos are copyrightable under U.S. law. It's provided it's an original work of visual art. It's fixed in a tangible medium, assuming that your skin is fixed in a tangible medium, although as we get older, I don't know how fixed that is. Does it also fall under one of the categories, which is protected under copyright? And is there a minimum amount of creativity? All those things seem to be a yes. So who owns the copyright? If the artist does, do they have control over the image and how that athlete exploits it? So most artists don't necessarily have a problem if the athlete appears in the game, but as it becomes more prominent, they have a bigger issue, especially with the amount of money being thrown around in the video game industry that they want to share of that revenue. And that could also be maybe the athlete appears on the cover of packaging, or the athlete appears in a TV commercial. And one of the courts, and that had to deal with an injunction where one of the plaintiffs was trying to stop the distribution, I believe it was the Mike Tyson case, and they sought an injunction, and you have to prove two things: irreparable harm and success on likelihood of success on the merits. And in that particular case, the judge acknowledged that, yeah, it seems like tattoos would be copyrightable, so that may be success on the merits, but they didn't see irreparable harm, so therefore they avoided the preliminary injunction regarding the film. And then you have to talk about a whole bunch of other issues regarding copyrights, because once you have a copyright and you are the owner, then you have certain rights, derivatives, modifications, distribution comes into play. And one of the questions is, can an artist cover up the tattoo? Does that somehow violate the artist's rights? So if you're an athlete and perhaps you have a tattoo on your arm and you were married at the time and your wife's name was Jenny, LeBron loves Jenny, 3 years later you get a divorce, I don't know if I still want to have Jenny on my arm, so you kind of cross it out or cover it up. And there have been instances where people have covered up tattoos because they no longer, maybe a sponsor did a deal with them, so they put a tattoo on. Sponsorship doesn't exist anymore, so they covered the tattoo. So in response to this controversy, a lot of video game developers have moved very cautiously, not all, but most of them have moved cautiously on how to deal with tattoos. And a New York Times article, that mentioned that there were about 100 tattoos in EA's FIFA game and UFC game. However, in contrast, the famous American football game called Madden, very few players, less than a handful of players, actually have tattoos appear in the game. And the reasoning for that was that EA took a very cautionary approach to this, and also the union that represents the players said, no tattoos in a game unless you have a license agreement in place that provides the rights. And as a result, there may be only about 5 players in EA Madden's game that have tattoos. And there's an example of Messi. You may have heard of that name here in South America. And so Lionel Messi is in EA's FIFA game. There's an example of the tattoos that appear. And again, the artwork is very impressive because the technology developments have allowed game developers to reach this particular issue. So tattoos, keep on the lookout for that particular issue. However, one final thing I do want to mention, so let's see if we get that. What are some of the possible defenses? This is a tattoo, I believe, that actually appears on LeBron James, so I thought it was a bit ironic. Is there an implied non-exclusive license when the tattoo is on the person? Could they argue fair use? I think that may be a tough argument. Another one could perhaps be a work made for hire, although you're going to need paperwork in order to argue work for hire, that the person who actually did the artwork is not the owner, but in fact the person that hired that person is the owner. Is there joint ownership? Did the artist as well as the athlete, are they joint owners? Therefore, the athlete has control to some extent on what they can do with the tattoo. Also, the issue of rights of publicity. Does the tattoo now appear on the athlete that somehow illustrates that person's persona? People identify that tattoo with the athlete, and therefore it may be a claim of rights of publicity. And then finally, in the United States, the First Amendment. And so this is a sweeping right that video game companies now have as a result of a recent Supreme Court case which stated that video games have just as much First Amendment protection as books and as films. And therefore, if you are telling a story, do tattoos, if they're part of that story, qualify under First Amendment protection? And the courts have to balance the rights of the owner of the intellectual property with the rights of publicity. And the courts have done that on trademark matters, which we'll discuss tomorrow with under the Rogers test, which is based on a famous actress and dancer from the United States, where they balance the interest of the trademark owner with the interest of the game developer or someone else involving their First Amendment rights. And you have to show some artistic relevance on why that trademark is being used, and if you are able to meet that criteria, is there an issue regarding consumer confusion? And again, we'll talk a little more about that. So those are some of the defenses that companies may use in the event of a controversy involving tattoos. So the next thing, and I will not demonstrate any of these dances, the dancing controversy. But like I said, it may not be as big of a controversy now as it was about 3 weeks ago or 3 months ago. And a number of celebrities have claimed that their copyrights and their dance moves were infringed by game developers. And 2 of the biggest franchises, Fortnite, you may have heard of that, and NBA 2K series. Again, money's involved, therefore potentially a lawsuit. So this is one called the Carlton Dance, well, not called the Carlton Dance, but created a dance known as the Carlton. And on the left-hand side, you see some screenshots from the game, and on the right-hand side is the artist who is performing on Dancing with the Stars. And so he's claiming that they used his dance move in those video games, and as a result, it was copyright infringement. Here's another one. You may have heard of the Backpack Kid. You don't see it, but he has a backpack on his back, therefore the name. And also, they filed a lawsuit. On the top is a scene from Saturday Night Live, I believe, and then on the bottom is a clip from the game. And then another gentleman, the rapper Terry Ferguson, known as 2 Milli to most of us, decided that his dance move was also being infringed, so he also filed a lawsuit. However, despite those dance moves, in an unrelated case, the Supreme Court noted under the Copyright Act, a plaintiff can't sue for copyright infringement until the U.S. Copyright Office has either granted or refused the person's application for registration. In all these situations, none of them had filed for a copyright, and therefore they dropped their lawsuit, but the question then becomes, will they refile? And in addition to that, in 2017, the Copyright Office issued a guidance stating that you cannot register a short dance because it does not qualify under the Copyright Act. In February of 2019, the Copyright Office decided not to register the copyright to the Carlton dance, to the disappointment of many people. It was a simple dance routine and therefore not a choreographic work, which is one of the things that falls under protection under the copyright law. So the questions become, is a short dance copyrightable? Does it fall under the definition of choreography, which is protected by copyright? And really, what is the threshold? How many dance moves does someone need to perform in order for it to qualify as choreography under the Copyright Act? That has not yet been decided. There's no case law regarding that. So one of the arguments on why it shouldn't be protected is that these dance moves, especially if they're simple, they build somewhat of a building block for other dancers to perhaps use for their routines. So therefore, if you block it, you could end up blocking a lot of dances. So it's going to be a tough fight for them. So the other possibility, however, does the dance routine basically represent a person's persona, and therefore maybe they're protected under rights of publicity. Maybe a difficult argument to make. Charlie Chaplin, his dance move, actually it's probably the way he walks, that is protected, but that's incredibly unique, and I don't know if the average person necessarily identifies these dances with those particular celebrities. So we'll see what happens. So those are two of the most interesting issues involving the video game industry and intellectual property, so we'll probably be hearing a little more about that in the next year or so.
Muchas gracias, Greg y David, por sus ponencias. Yo creo que el mensaje final, tal vez para nosotros como abogados en nuestra mayoría latinoamericanos, es que en los deportes electrónicos sí hay una oportunidad muy grande respecto a la asesoría en intangibles, en derechos de propiedad intelectual, en publicidad, y cada vez se va a ver más en nuestros países, cada vez ya hay torneos, entonces creería que esto cada vez más va a ser más relevante. Y este tipo de conocimiento, pues que en temas de propiedad intelectual, tanto en Europa y Estados Unidos, muchas veces, unos años después, nosotros lo aplicamos. Creo que ese es el mensaje principal de pronto para nosotros como la utilidad de estas ponencias. Y no siendo más, no sé cómo estamos de tiempo, si podemos abrir espacio para preguntas. Okay. Por ahí, Aldo Fabricio y Roberto Arochi. Sí, vamos a permitir dos preguntas de Aldo Fabricio y de Roberto. Hay tres.
Yes.
¿Ya te llevan?
Sí, sí.
right? We know video games are very good at teaching us to do things. I'm going to acknowledge that, right? So how does it not teach us to do some of this other stuff, right? So that's something we all have to think about. But the truth is, I read really horrible books sometimes. I watch really horrible films sometimes. And then I go home and I rub my pregnant wife's feet, and I try to be a good guy, and I pet my dog, and just like everybody else here does. And that seems to be the way that we process and deal with video games at any age. But again, it's a longer talk. It's a question worth asking and continuing to ask. But the science is in, and there's no effect.
Are really focusing copyrights. And I believe that the courts are not really analyzing that it's a personal right. And the personal right is protected by local laws and not a federal law. In Mexico, we had a case that the voice of a woman in a smartphone was claiming copyright. And when we responded, we say, no, this is not copyright. This is a personal right which is based on local laws. And the fine is much lower. So that more than fair use, maybe it's really a claim of a personal right based on a local law, which really the millions will be only pennies. I don't know what's your comment.
Well, if I understood the question right, it was someone was has a voice message, is that, or? Yes. Yeah, so perhaps it falls under rights of publicity, but I think that's going to be an incredibly difficult claim. So in the United States, rights of publicity is a bit complicated because there's really no federal statute. The Supreme Court has only addressed one issue regarding rights of publicity, and it dealt with First Amendment issues. And so the result has been that all the states have their own ways in which they approach rights of publicity. Some court decisions, some statutory, they vary quite a bit. California, New York probably have the broadest rights, and some of the states acknowledge that someone's voice is protected, but it has to be very unique. So Bette Midler, for example, who at one time was a very famous actress and singer, sued, I believe, Ford Motor Company for a commercial. Her voice or song did not appear in that commercial, but one of her backup singers basically replicated how she sounded. And she sued under grounds for violation of rights of publicity, and she won. But there are very few cases where there's been the voice. Again, it has to be very distinct. Tom Waits, sounding like this, also was successful against, I think, Frito-Lay's in a copyright infringement. But ironically, Nancy Sinatra, the daughter of Frank Sinatra, lost the case because the judge said her voice isn't unique. Boy, talk about an insult. So that's my feeling, that maybe rights of publicity, but that's really a stretch because does that person's voice, is it so well recognized that it would even matter? Well, it's not fixed. Well, how is it? Yeah, how is it fixed though? The voice. I'm sorry.
Putting the voice as an example. I'm just referring that your example that you gave us. Why is copyright? Why is not a personal right?
Oh, yeah. Well, maybe it will be decided that it is a personal right. I personally think it is absolutely a personal right when someone puts a tattoo on you, that you should have the right to control it. But maybe one day a court will have to decide to balance that test on to what extent the artist may have some rights and what extent the person has rights. That's my feeling. I don't know. You feel the same way?
Well, I think you covered it.
Okay.
Martin Michaud, considering the great revenues, what are the tax implications that are involved on this?
So what are the tax implications?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I'll say that's enormously complicated. We could do a whole conference on that. So, but here are the big things that people care a lot about, right? So when you fly influencers or you fly esports players to a certain place, is that going to be business or entertainment expense, or is that going to be a payment to them? If you give a prize in a certain country, how will that be taxed in the country? Is it gambling income? Is it some other type of income to the player? Those are the biggest things that I work on now. In some countries, it's just an ordinary, like the United States. I'm not a tax attorney, let's start with that. Well, we have great tax attorneys, but I'm asked this question a lot. It's normally just an ordinary, necessary business expense in the United States, and so the pricing for the travel is deductible by the payor like that. The more interesting question is, or another interesting question is, how is it received by the person? Like, is it winnings, or is it some other type of income, or is it considered like a passive intellectual property right income? Because some of it is. The sponsorship rights, for instance, are going to be more like a royalty income and less like a labor income, but the winnings are going to be labor income. The short answer for everyone in the room is that esports needs tax attorneys, and esports needs tax attorneys in your country, right? Because it's too complicated to sort out right now.
Bueno, creo que ya una más. Okay.
My question is to David. I'd like to ask you your personal opinion to your clients when how they can protect themselves against a suit in the case of the tattoo. Because once I read something about a tattoo artist that sued a restaurant chain because they use it over a use of Frankenstein, I think, Frankenstein tattoo. In their commercial, someone was using Frankenstein tattoo and appeared in their commercial, and the restaurant chain was sued because of this use. So I want to know your personal opinion about that. What do you say to your client to protect themselves against this kind of court actions? Thank you.
Well, Greg deals with marketing as well, but the real short answer to that is get a contract. If you think you're going to exploit those rights in any means, get something in writing. All these problems have resulted because no contract was signed, which is pretty typical of the relationship between the athlete and the artist. They're not even thinking about those things. But that would be one way to do it.
Yes.
Or they need to cover it up somehow. Definitely not focus on it if you know it's going to be an issue.
Yeah, just to explain, I think in this case, the objective of the restaurant chain was not the tattoo.
Yeah.
It's just without their without their object.
Yeah.
Just
So
because they appeared
It's kind of
in
passing.
the commercial.
Yeah.
So they don't think about contract or something
Yeah.
like that.
Understand.
You know, they don't ask a lawyer's opinion about that. I don't know how the case ends.
Well, one of the things is, and then I'll let Greg make comment, is that even if they had shot the commercial, it's always a good idea to maybe have a lawyer look at that commercial to make sure that the rights, in fact, have been cleared. People don't know these issues. That's why they hire lawyers, and hopefully the lawyers know it. And admittedly, there were probably lawyers 20 years ago, 15 years ago, that wouldn't have even thought about tattoos being an issue. So it needs to be cleared. Also for insurance purposes, it probably now needs to be cleared as well.
So quickly on that, we do a lot of commercials at my firm, and we do look at all of the actors and actresses for tattoos. And so the things we do, we blur them after, we costume them differently, we get an indemnity from them or the agent. Those are the things we have to do. But a tattoo in the background on a dancer, we'll let that go. But a commercial that the entire point of the commercial is the tattoo, like the one that you showed, we would need a release. You might think it's funny or not. I have tattoos. I don't have a release. So, but I'm probably not going to get filmed that much, you know? If anybody would like to film me, we can talk later. But the other thing too is if you are an athlete or an actor or a dancer, if and when you get a tattoo, you should get a release now that we know those things. But the short answer to your question as far as what we actually do, I watch a lot of commercials all day Coke, Nike, Bud Light, Kentucky Fried Chicken, Old Spice, all of these brands. About a third of my practice is video games, 2/3 of my practice is advertising. So we get releases, we get indemnities, we blur it, or we decide to let it go, but we decide to let it go only when it's in the background or it's very fast. Yeah.
You watch too much TV.
I watch a lot of TV for work and video games. Yeah, okay.
Bueno, muchas gracias a todos. Con esto damos por terminado este panel. Les agradezco mucho por su atención. Muchas gracias.